Steve, we had the pleasure of catching up with you at the last Cami Connect, which is our virtual conference on YouTube. Little hint, it's coming up soon. But for our listeners out there who don't know you, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so Steve Martinez here. I'm a social science teacher from California, United States. I teach government economics at the senior level, and then sophomore level, I have world history. Before I started teaching, like in the traditional sense, like in the classroom, I worked with high school and junior high marching bands and was really involved in the arts, writing, designing stuff. So when I came into the classroom, I came in with like a different lens in terms of like creativity and really how to scaffold different things, like scaffold things for, and I was a percussionist and I taught drumline. So like scaffolding at that level with drummers, like what could that look like in a classroom with like different subject matter? So I came into it very, like I said, different lens, different perspective, and loved what I did before, but I knew that I didn't want to be a band director. Any band directors that are listening, like that is, I respect what you do, but I wasn't willing to put in that kind of time.
There's still time, Steve. There's still time.
I don't know.
I can see you,
especially
out there getting it.
Especially like knowing that I wanted a family down the road, right? Like that life's a little different. But in college, like the social sciences really appealed to me in terms of like politics, history, and the skills it took to obtain those to obtain that subject matter. And as a kid, I wasn't the most academic kid, and I didn't really become really that academic until I was an adult. So I was kind of like late in the game in terms of college, in terms of like growing up a little bit. But that also changed that motivated how I handle the classroom now, helping those kids that are not very academic, but I know they can do it, right? And for me, I wish I had that as a kid, and I did a little bit, but I wish someone would have like sat me down and be like, no, you can do this, right? Like you can do these rigorous, really academic things at a much younger age. So when I entered the classroom, I had that perspective. I really loved technology already coming into it because of what I consider my previous profession, writing music. Like there's a lot of software involved, stuff of that nature. So I really grabbed into the technology stuff right away. Really explored with blended learning, project-based learning, and even to an extent, gamification, and how do we reach students in meaningful ways. Without putting the strain of what the world is now, right? And because there's a lot of stress, there's a lot of anxiety, like what's going on right now, both locally and globally. And how do we do that in a way that is A, rigorous, but B, supports our students on various different levels?
Steve, I need to be your neighbor teacher. I need to be, listen, you and the little rant you just did, I was like, yes, I do want to do, yeah.
I was still stuck on the drums thing. I like really want to learn how to play the drums. I guess with drumline, it's a little bit different, but like a regular drum set, it just amazes me that people can have each of their four limbs doing something different at each time. And I really want to learn how to do that. So if we're ever at some kind of conference, you better bring some sort of drum because I want to learn.
Yeah, we can do that.
Noted.
Yeah, I'll put that in my calendar.
Yeah,
I mean, yes. I feel like I learned so much about you now that I know you got this like band perspective. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. I'm inspired. So today we're talking about the power of project-based learning, something you definitely incorporate a lot. Can you tell us what is project-based learning, first of all, and how did you originally start getting into it?
So my journey with project-based learning was kind of a bumpy road because I thought I knew what it was going into it. And the more I read on it, like from people that were smarter than I was like, wait a second, I don't even know what this is. And I'm using this term without understanding it. And as far as I'm concerned, there's no real way to define project-based learning, but you certainly talk about like the ingredients that maybe most people would consider PBL. So students PBL is where students take, or you give students like a big problem, like a wicked problem, or like the super complex question that they have to solve. And the question, though, has to be authentic, right? Like it can't just be a question that you would see like on a test or like a study guide. What I try to do is try to present a question that really pertains to their community and the problems they face as students, as people. Like what problems do their parents face, right? What problems do they see like in their neighborhoods? And so by taking that problem, they have to solve that problem. And for me, it's all about having the students explore their own passions, not just from a skill set standpoint, but also from like, like for me, like we've been asking kids the wrong question for years. Like we always ask kids like, what do you want to be when you grow up? But what I ask my students is like, what do you want to solve when you grow up? Because that to me makes like the whole purpose, their whole why different. And they start to experience like, well, I'm not here just to get a grade. I'm here to learn the skills that it takes to not only support my passions, but support the problems that they're passionate about. And so they use the inquiry, it's not just research. It's like sometimes it's going and talking with people, interviewing someone, collecting all this data. And then also the actual instruction they're getting in my classroom to bring everything together to solve that one big problem that we have for the semester or for the unit. And in terms of the project itself, and again, this is how I define it. This is how I do it. You might see, someone else say something a little different, but I have my students, they can create whatever they want, right? Like if they want to create a video, they can go create a video. If it's a documentary, a podcast, if they want to learn how to code, if they want to build a website. And then the conversation becomes, I'm like, what skills are important to you with respect to what profession you want to enter? Because I can have a kid like, they just want to do vocational school. I'm like, okay, let's work on those skills that you need for that. And I'll have another kid like, hey, I want to, I'm going to go into computer science. I'm like, okay, let's work on those skills then. So that way, the whole experience, it's all about customizing and personalizing that instruction. And for me,
I was literally just about to say that. I was like, wait, project-based, it is a really good way to personalize instruction. I was like, yeah.
100%.
Like if my
100%.
teachers just let me go, if they let me go wild, everything would have been about fashion. Just so you know. I love fashion, but like what I love is this idea that the project is not just something that the teacher comes up with. It's like a concept, right? It's like a mood, a vibe. I like that. I like your attitude about PBL.
Well, and that's where like when I first started doing it, I was like, oh, it's all about the project. It's all about the project. And then I later realized it's not about the project. It's about the experience. It's about going through the rigor of problem solving, all these things, trying to solve this big thing that's bigger than themselves. And to me, that's more than just the classroom. Like that's life, right? And because what kind of problems are going to be presented to this current young generation in the next 20, 30 years? If you look at what's happening right now and where we're headed, regardless of where you are, like politically or what have you, there are going to be serious problems to solve. And I think PBL prepares them for that.
Ooh, preach. Ooh, this has like been the year of problems. So,
Yes.
If I would have had more PBL back in the day, maybe I would be coping better. I don't know.
It made me think
that
if I would have had that, it opens the students up more to figure out, like what you said, what do they want to accomplish throughout the rest of their life outside of that normal K-12 public education. Because when I was in high school, I just knew, okay, I have to go to college. But what the heck am I going for? I don't know what I want to do. I had no idea because I didn't have a teacher like you. And you better get a scholarship.
And you better get a scholarship because we ain't got no money. Okay.
But I didn't have a teacher like Steve, like kind of pushing me in to see what it is that I care about. Like what further. So I just love that. What is it about PBL that you love with your students or with your classroom or anything about it that you love?
When I first started teaching, it was like I would do that initial direct instruction. We would do the formative assessment, like the whole thing, right? Like, and the test at the end, whatever. And I just realized that all we're really doing is just having kids move words from one place, normally a textbook, to somewhere else, normally like a study guide or even an essay or like a written response, right? That's all we're doing. And that deeper learning wasn't taking place. And I was getting frustrated that I wasn't able to facilitate that for my students with the setup I had. So the more I learn about PBL, and again, to answer your question, is it allows them to think deeper about the content, and therefore they learn deeper about the content. So when they're trying to solve something using, I don't know, the concepts of the United States Congress, it's not just memorizing a bunch of stuff that they'll eventually forget, possibly. Hopefully they don't, but let's be realistic. But it's more about thinking deeply about those concepts, and in real time, while we're all working on the project together, whether it's in groups or individually, seeing those big light bulbs go off in real time. We're like, oh, I get the importance here. Or, oh, this is why the Constitution is written this way, to make sure that X, Y, or Z doesn't happen, right? And they start making connections, not only within a unit, but across the entire curriculum. And sometimes they make connections even to like previous classes or other classes, to where things are sometimes even cross-curricular, depending on the nature of the project and what we're doing. So again, to answer your question, I think it's those big light bulbs that go off that would not happen if I were to just lecture at them and have them take a test.
And you got me thinking, kind of, because you said you were kind of stuck in taking that words from a textbook and then words to a study guide. So it might be a little bit daunting for teachers to shift from that if they've been doing that for years. So what kind of tips do you have for teachers who might be new to the PBL framework strategy, and where do they begin to even start?
That can be a hard question, for sure. And so I think, though, that I took baby steps with it, right? Like, I think one of the first things I did was gave him a hard question, and let's just brainstorm on that question. And that's all we did the first time, was like, here's this hard thing. And what we did is I do like a digital whiteboard. Be like, let's just get ideas out there. Because that's really where kids struggle, or where they can struggle in PBL, is they just want to be told what to do. They don't want to all the time think, right? And because thinking's hard, and thinking's hard for me, and fostering that culture of like, hey, it's okay to stumble through this. And so that's where I started, was like, okay, let's take these hard questions, these hard problems, and just let's think about what we know about the content, and let's just brainstorm on possible solutions. So doing little things like that, and be like, hey, let's just start with the brainstorm part. Let's start maybe just with getting kids in groups and talking about, what they're passionate about, not just within the content, but also like personally, and maybe what problems could be solved that they see on a regular basis. So I think like starting small, when, the first time you go through an entire PBL process, the big thing is taking like a concept, tying it to a question, and being very purposeful, at least at first, with like, here's 2 standards that we are going to use to fix this problem. And then letting kids explore a little bit. And when they explore, though, be very keep it very teacher controlled. Because like my kids get to the point where it's very student centered, very student controlled. But at the beginning of the year, I'm like, hey, you're 2 standards, and you are using the high school library database. You are just in this space, or you are just in this folder that I created with sources for you. Because they're not ready to just wild west of the internet and the world, but you certainly can scaffold it, and making sure that it's very teacher controlled the first time they do it, and don't go full on PBL the first time. I certainly didn't do that. I was like, hey, just start one step at a time, and every chapter, or rather every unit, you can explore a little bit more. And I think the other thing is just reading on it. That's where I learned the most, was just reading and learning from experts out there.
this is the first time anybody's ever synthesized like the starting steps. Like I really do feel like it's doable. Like everybody should be having brainstorm sessions with your students, whatever you teach. Like you should be having conversations about just big problems, big questions, big issues. Even if you're just using that to get to know the kids, everybody should be doing that, right? So I feel like it's a right there step. I also liked how you mentioned it's good to find out what the students are into, what problems they notice. I don't think we do that enough. I don't even do that enough as an adult, asking my friends and family, you know, like, what problems do you see? I love that step. Thank you. Thanks, Steve.
You're welcome. I think the only other thing that I left out to answer that question is feedback and reflection, and asking the kids. Get there. Okay. I'm just saying that was the only piece of, like, if I could have added one more thing, it would have been that.
All right, friends, I have a treat. I have a surprise. It is the first ever project that I've ever done with a group of students, ever. So I was student teaching in 2008. By the way, my mama laminated this. I don't know why. It's in like a sheet cover. Y'all see it? It's in a sheet cover. But I'm going to show y'all this because you're going to love the nostalgia of it. But we made, I know you see it. Do you see it? Do you see what that says? Can you read that? It definitely says MySpace.
Yeah.
We made MySpace pages on paper. Oh my gosh. Yes, we did.
That's a throwback.
And then they made a top 8, and baby, they shared comments and they had to staple them. They had to staple the comments. And I had a great time with this. I taught the Crucible, and the kids had to be characters from the play. Our big problem is, what if somebody cried witch today? So like the story is about crying witch. And so we decided to play that on paper MySpace pages. But, you know, to cycle things back, this was my rubric. It's long. I had to go through each of these components when I was giving feedback to these kids. So the project is cute. It's cute. Kid colored it and everything. It was beautiful. This was the pits. So my question for you, Steve, is how do you manage all of the feedback you have to give when you're doing PBL? Because,
So, yeah, that can be daunting. I think I eventually just came to terms with that the feedback and also the reflection doesn't have to be just me. And so when the students are working on a project, it's okay that feedback is peer-to-peer. Because here's the thing. I try to make it to where, you know, hopefully how it would be like in the workforce, right? How many times at Cami are coworkers giving each other feedback? And the thing is we need to build a culture of being able to give and receive feedback. So I try to be purposeful in terms of like the skills that are needed in the workforce. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that I try to create a digital space where we have different channels where I go in and I give them feedback and I conference with each group in the class. And remember, I flip my classroom. So I don't spend any time lecturing whatsoever. So now all this open space, this class space, is really designed for the PBL. And I'm a big believer, and I've only said this to like 2 other people, but I'm a real big believer that like PBL belongs alongside flipped classroom for that reason. And so they get the feedback from me. They get the feedback from each other. We do automated feedback, like, using technology. But the big thing is normally at the end of a PBL, at the end of a project, they're not giving it to me. They're giving it to some intended audience, normally in the community. Sometimes it's bigger than that. I've had my students present to individuals that have worked on campaigns at DC. So so sometimes the audience is huge, and sometimes the audience is like, stakeholders, professionals in our community. So they're getting feedback from, you know, local CEOs, journalists, college professors. And so you have to bring everyone involved into your classroom, I feel, to help with the feedback, because that feedback is better than just me. Like that I don't consider myself to be that smart, right? So it's all about bringing people in that are better than me, that are more specialized, to give that feedback, and then teaching kids how to reflect on it.
Steve, wait a minute. I hope every teacher out there caught that hack. Number one, why are you giving all of the feedback? Why are you the sole provider of the feedback? I was making it harder for myself by being this like sole holder, beholder of knowledge, and I have to hand review everybody's project. That's a shift. You know, that's a shift. But one that I think would really make classrooms much more efficient. So tip number one, let the kids peer review. Tip number two, if you flip even some of your lessons, let's not say you're doing the whole thing. Let's say you do some of your lessons where the kids participate in the lecture at home and they come and discuss at school. Even if you do that maybe once a week, you are now embedding your conference time, your feedback time during the day. So you're not doing it at home. So you can actually like have a life.
And I will say that I have read that there's plenty of teachers that don't flip that still make it work. I think their direct instruction might look different. I'm just assuming. But it is possible to not flip and still do PBL. I know there's plenty of them out there.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because I thought that right from the get-go. I'm like, I wonder if he flipped his whole classroom, or if he like includes this into like your actually everyday classroom. And then shameless plug to Marcus, but he just made kind of like a goals sheet that to be used in Cami. And I was thinking of that for your students, because they could set their goals, and then we have like a little reflection spot. So we'll have to send that your way, and maybe you'll try it out for that student self-led reflection. And when you're doing the PBL, because Marcus, go ahead.
We're not gonna talk about the MySpace. We're just gonna let that pass. We're just gonna let that happen.
Well, I wanted to know if you made your students like sing a song that went along with their project, because you know MySpace, you could set like your page song.
Correct. So this is what we did. So they had to put the song. So she was Abigail. If you read The Crucible, Abigail, she get accused, baby, whole thing. And her song is Bad by Michael Jackson.
Yes.
And,
so they
her
did
MySpace
have to include it.
Her MySpace URL is myspace.com/bewitched. You kids, these kids, I cannot. My favorite is her blog to herself. John Proctor is, you know, the love interest of hers, and she's like blogging about he's playing with her heart. She wants to go back to Massachusetts. This was the time of my life. I just wish I had a Steve Martinez, because the project was more about me than it was about them, because I love MySpace. So I think another thing to learn from is true. Another thing to learn from Steve is like, honestly, PBL is not about us. It is not about a creative project that I came up with. We had a great time. We had a great time synthesizing The Crucible in that way. I'm not saying it's a bad project. We had a great time. I got a good review on that. But what I am saying is, how much more effective would that have been if I gave more freedom of choice? You know, like if I really opened up that problem about being a witch in modern day and really let them create whatever to solve the problem. I don't know. Ooh, you got my wheels turning, Steve. Thank you.
And so while you're walking around in your classroom, seeing your kids working on their projects, what are some look-fors for teachers to indicate that PBL is working while you're seeing them? I know earlier you mentioned the light bulb moments where they're kind of connecting to different classes or different ideas, but what are some things for you?
I think the moment that your classroom really feels like a community. I think when when my kids first started with PBL, they're very they were just in their own little box, sweating, feeling scared. He's like, this is because kids do look at my projects and like, wow, this is really hard. But it's all about helping each other though. And that's where, going back to the digital whiteboarding, the brainstorming, the conferencing, like if somebody in the room has a good idea, blast that out to the entire class, blast that out to all of my classes. Because like that one idea that can inspire another idea that can inspire another one. Right. And so with that, when it feels like we're all in it together, even if we're building individual projects, it's not cheating if the idea is good and it's solving your problem in your own way. And so to me, I think as a teacher, if you can see that community build and supporting each other and still see those light bulbs go off in real time as because I think that's a different level of collaboration, because it's not like collaborating like, hey, we're all on the same Google Doc and we're typing into it. It's more of like, and not to say that that's not good. I think that's a good skill to have, but that collaboration of like, hey, we're working together to solve something that's pretty complex. And when they walk away from that with that level of collaboration, they feel empowered. They're like, we did something crazy. We did something big and we did something good.
What a goal. Like, what a goal. Like, I never went into the class with the intention of creating community. Like, I would never think, like, make sure it's looking like a community, make sure it's looking respectful and collaborative. Like, I never went into it with that goal. For me, I was like, they better pass that test. They better pass that because it was so much pressure. But honestly, when they behave like a community, it makes sense. The rest of the stuff kind of falls into place. They can trust each other. You can experiment with new instructional ideas because they behave like a community. Huh.
Yeah, and the formative assessment, just to be clear, the formative assessment is more just natural, right? Like, yeah, the conferencing, all that helps. But a lot of my formative is just walking around and hearing the conversations and hearing conversations that are meaningful, authentic, like levels of, that level of application that I don't think would exist in my class if I didn't have PBL.
Did y'all catch that? See, Steve, you dropping nuggets, friend, and I want people to catch it. A conversation is a formative assessment.
Correct. And sometimes I'm not even involved in the conversation. I'm just listening and be like, wow, that's crazy smart. I would not have thought of that. But two 15-year-olds are having more meaningful conversations than what I would have with, someone else like down the road, right?
I would just never thought to pay to pay attention because I was so overwhelmed. But two, to like almost like document and track that as like, good job on your little clipboard or, your little digital checklist, whatever like running record you have. That's such a good idea. Ooh, okay. Sorry.
It's all good.
Speaking of like the kids, we're on a rant about the kids. Love the kids. I want to talk a little bit more about the kids. Can you tell me about a class or a specific student that really evolved or changed because of PBL?
Yeah, I can talk about that.
Sit on it. Think.
Well, no. So I had, this had to have been last year. So this is last year. So this is in the middle of like remote learning in the transition into like kind of hybrid. But I had a senior, and so he, not the most academic kid, right? And nice kid, was not interested. He's not interested in college, right? He was interested in like, I think maybe law enforcement or vocational. I forgot what exactly. But we did okay first semester, but I have a big PBL that's about semester long. Second semesters, we get into economics. And that's when we transitioned into hybrid learning. So I got to actually meet him face to face like normal humans instead of being over the computer, right? So when we started going into economics and working through the PBL process, his motivation in my class changed. His willingness to have conversations about the content changed. It's almost like, oh, I care about this thing. And I asked him towards the end of the year, because he ended up finishing his project, and he what he did is he attempted to tackle the issue of crime in a particular neighborhood by trying. He basically framed an idea of like, we have homeless shelters in our area, but a lot of times like people, they bring them in and then they can only stay there for a certain amount of time, and then they have to leave because that supply demand, like there were a lot of them, and still are. So his idea was like, look, why aren't we doing more when they're in the facility than just sheltering them and feeding them? Why can't we institute like nuggets of maybe like volunteer teachers, incorporating maybe like education for them to get back in the workforce, and that in turn could address the issue of crime. And so I asked him towards the end, I'm like, so what was the shift? And I was speaking just academically, or maybe just his motivation. And he was like, because I was being asked to solve something I really care about. Like, it wasn't just learning out of a textbook. It was, you put us out in our community and addressing something that I wanted to address. Not that you wanted, Martinez. He's like, it had nothing to do with you. Like, it wasn't like I was telling him what to learn. He was deciding what to learn.
And learning all the additional life skills and social skills, and, just learning everything just from the one project. I want to go do a project now. I want to go like paint a wall or something. I want to go solve world hunger.
Okay, so Steve, last question. We're going to be diving in deeper into project-based learning at the next Cami Connect in February. Can you give us a taster of what you'll be talking about in that session?
Yeah, so I'm going to be, my goal for that session is to help teachers, help people consider how they could get started and how they could scaffold the process for them as teachers and for their students, because that's kind of different. Though if you really rely on the resources and the ideas that I'm giving out, my hope is that it will help for people that want to get started with it, as well as giving them some additional resources in terms of like inspiration, ideas, whether it's within their own domain or for our elementary folks, like maybe something that's cross-curricular as well. So my goal is to really like, hey, here's how we can get started with PBL. And hopefully that conversation can continue even beyond my session.
And I love that
I'm thankful.
Included the elementary folks. I'm a former kindergarten teacher.
Absolutely.
Everything is always like, except kindergarten. So thank you for including the elementary guys.
Also, I do want to say that like I have a ton of questions about PBL now. Like I want to dive down the rabbit hole, but we ain't got time for all of that. So just a heads up, Steve is gonna give you more details about how he does this thing. It's February 26th. You can check the Cami website for details on all of that. But I feel like that's gonna be your part 2, and I'm looking forward to it. Yeah.
I am too. I love talking about PBL, like at work. Sometimes like, I get caught up in the conversation with my colleagues. But it's great. Thanks for having me. And I appreciate being allowed to speak on it, because I just love it. And I love helping people.
Y'all, this was a good time. This was a really, 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 really good time. I think for me, the most exciting part about this is I feel like PBL is so doable. Some of those first steps that Steve dropped, like just ask them to brainstorm. That I can do. So yeah, thanks.
And for me, that the feedback point that you made, the feedback is ongoing during the whole project, and delegate some of that feedback to the people or things that your students are learning about. So I loved that. That's saving teachers some time, some stress, and then getting the students involved in that self-reflection as well.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. I love talking about not just teaching, but also project-based learning, and really tapping into education in authentic ways. Because for me, that's what best supports my students. So again, super thank you. And hopefully everybody listening is doing their best right now in these difficult times. So thanks again.